The air in the office of Miller and Finch was a carefully curated blend of old money and finality. It smelled of worn leather, decaying paper, and the faint antiseptic scent of lemon polish, as if the very molecules in the room were preserved from a wealthier, more certain time. Elizabeth Blackwood, at 82, felt none of its comfort. She sat in her wheelchair, a fragile sculpture of bone and paper-thin skin, her hands resting in her lap like sleeping birds. Her gaze was fixed on a point somewhere in the deep, swirling grain of the mahogany conference table, a void that perfectly mirrored the one she kept carefully cultivated behind her eyes. Across from her, the future was already being spent. Her son, Jacob, 55 and corseted into a suit that cost more than a modest car, radiated an impatience that was almost electric. He didn't look at his mother. He looked through her, at the vast fortune she represented. Beside him, his wife, Sarah, a masterclass in performative sorrow, adjusted the silk scarf at her throat. Her face was a perfect mask of gentle concern, but her eyes, quick and sharp, darted around the room, assessing, calculating. They had already remodeled the kitchen in their minds, booked the crews, silenced the creditors. In the corner, almost blending into the shadows cast by a towering bookshelf of legal texts, stood Olivia Hayes. At 35, in a simple nurse's uniform that seemed an affront to the room's opulence, she was a pillar of stillness. She was the help, an accessory, a ghost at the feast. Mr. Miller, a man whose jowls sagged with the weight of other people's secrets, cleared his throat. The sound was like gravel being poured onto velvet. He shifted the sheaf of papers before him, the rustle unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. Jacob leaned forward, a predator sensing the final moments of the hunt. His smile was sharp, a flash of white teeth in the dim light. Sarah placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, a gesture of restraint that was, in itself, an act. "We know this is difficult, Mother," Jacob began, his voice a low, syrupy murmur meant for the lawyer's benefit. "But Dad wanted to make sure everything was in order, that you were taken care of." Elizabeth didn't respond. She didn't even blink. Her stillness was an anchor in the churning sea of their greed. "Mr. Miller began to read, his voice a monotone drone that skimmed over the legal boilerplate. "Being of sound mind and body, all prior testaments and codicils are hereby revoked. Funeral expenses to be paid from the estate." Jacob tapped his fingers on the table, a staccato rhythm of pure entitlement. Each tap said, "Get on with it." "And so," Mr. Miller said, finally arriving at the heart of the matter, his gaze lifting from the page to momentarily meet Jacob's, then flitting away as if burned. He took a small, nervous sip of water. The tension in the room tightened, becoming a physical presence. Jacob's smile was fixed, brittle. Sarah held her breath. "And the entirety of my estate, Mr." Miller read, his voice suddenly seeming small, including all properties, both residential and commercial. "All stocks, bonds, and liquid assets, I leave in its totality to—" He paused. It was a deliberate, theatrical pause, the kind lawyers use to underscore the gravity of a moment. But this wasn't for theatre. This was a man bracing for impact. In that sliver of silence, Jacob's entire life of expectation, of being the princeling, the heir apparent, crested. He was already rising from his chair, a king about to claim his throne. "Miss Olivia Hayes." The name dropped into the room like a stone into a silent pool. The ripples spread outward, distorting everything. For a full 3 seconds, there was no sound at all, just the hum of the air conditioning and the frantic, silent processing of information. Jacob's face was a slow-motion car crash of emotion. The confident greed melted first, replaced by a slack-jawed, comical disbelief. He looked from the lawyer to Olivia, as if trying to place her in this new, impossible context. Then, the disbelief curdled, boiling into a dark, mottled rage that started in his gut and flooded his face with colour. Sarah's jaw didn't just drop. It unhinged. Her manicured hand, the one that had been resting so gently on her husband's arm, flew to her mouth, a gesture of shock that was, for the first time that day, utterly genuine. Olivia Hayes did not move. She did not smile. She did not flinch. She simply stood in the corner, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression unreadable. Then the world exploded. What? Jacob's voice wasn't a shout. It was a roar, a primal sound of outrage that rattled the crystal water glasses on the table. He slammed his fist down on the polished mahogany. The impact sent a shockwave through the room, making Mr. Miller jump, and Sarah let out a small, strangled gasp. "That's impossible! That's a joke! A sick joke!" He surged to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He pointed a trembling finger at Olivia, his face a mask of purple fury. "Her! You're leaving everything to her? The help? The woman who changes my mother's sheets?" Mr. Miller shrank back in his chair. "Mr. Blackwood, the will is ironclad. It was signed by your father, witnessed, and notarized. I can assure you." "I don't care what you can assure me." Jacob spat, advancing on Olivia's corner. "She did this. She manipulated a dying man. She preyed on a sick old woman." He turned his furious gaze on his mother. "Did you know about this? Did you let this happen?" Elizabeth's eyes, those deep, vacant pools, finally lifted. They met his, and for a fleeting moment, there was something there. Not fear, not confusion, something colder, something ancient. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the familiar, frustrating emptiness. She said nothing. "This isn't over," Jacob snarled, his voice dropping to a menacing hiss. He looked from Olivia's calm face to his mother's silent one. "This is theft. And you," he jabbed his finger toward Olivia again, "you will not see a single penny of it. We will fight this. We will drag you through every court in this state. We will prove what you are. A parasite." He turned on his heel, grabbed a stunned Sarah by the arm, and stormed out of the room, leaving a vortex of fury in his wake. The heavy oak door slammed shut, the sound echoing the finality of Mr. Omar's. Miller's words. In the ringing silence, Mr. Miller slowly gathered his papers, his hands shaking slightly. He avoided looking at either of the women left in the room. Olivia finally moved. She walked from her corner to Elizabeth's side, her steps soft and measured. She placed a gentle hand on the worn handle of the wheelchair. Elizabeth lifted her head, her gaze shifting from the table to the door her son had just burst through. The blankness in her eyes remained, a perfect, unbreachable defense. The silent lamb had just watched the wolf walk into a trap of its own making. The ride home was a study in cold fury. The interior of the Mercedes, usually a sanctuary of soft leather and quiet power, felt like a pressure cooker. Jacob drove with a white-knuckled grip on the wheel, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might crack. He muttered a stream of curses under his breath, a venomous litany of words like vulture, thief, and incompetent. Sarah wasn't comforting him. She was fighting a different war. Her head was bowed, her face illuminated by the cold blue light of her phone. Her thumbs moved with frantic, furious speed across the screen. The clinking of her diamond bracelets was the only sound that punctuated Jacob's seething monologue. She was not a wife offering solace. She was a general mobilizing her troops. The Blackwood residence loomed at the end of the long, manicured driveway. It wasn't a house. It was a statement, a monument of cold stone and dark glass. It was less a home and more a mausoleum for a dynasty that had just been declared dead. The moment they stepped inside, the chill of the marble foyer seemed to leach the warmth from the air. The silence within was vast and echoing, a silence that Richard Blackwood had cultivated and enforced for 50 years. Olivia had already wheeled Elizabeth into the grand, cathedral-like living room. The cavernous space, with its soaring ceilings and furniture that was chosen for its intimidating scale rather than its comfort, dwarfed the old woman. Olivia was gently arranging a soft cashmere blanket over Elizabeth's legs when Jacob stormed in. "Get out!" he snapped at Olivia, not even looking at her. His focus was entirely on the small, frail figure in the wheelchair. Olivia straightened up. "Mrs. Blackwood is my patient. My duties." "Your duties are over," Jacob roared, finally turning to face her. His face was blotchy, his eyes wild. "You are trespassing. You have 1 hour to pack your things and get off this property before I have you removed by force." Olivia's expression remained placid. "I take my instructions from Mrs. Blackwood, or, as per the legal proceedings today, as the executor of the estate." The word executor was like a lit match on gasoline. Jacob took a half step toward her, his hands clenched into fists. "You have some nerve." It was Elizabeth who de-escalated it, with a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. A signal. Olivia saw it. She gave a slight nod. "I will be in my room," she said, her voice even. "Call me if you need anything, Elizabeth." She walked out, her posture erect, her departure leaving a vacuum that Jacob immediately filled with his rage. He paced in front of his mother, a caged animal. "You will fix this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. He stopped and leaned down, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and smelling of stale coffee and fury. "You will call Miller tomorrow morning. You will tell him you were coerced. You will sign whatever papers he puts in front of you to have this absurdity reversed. That vulture is not getting a dime of what is rightfully mine. Do you understand me?" Elizabeth looked up at him. Her eyes were wide, and in the dim light of the grand room they looked like dark, frightened glass. She seemed to shrink under the intensity of his glare. In the background, Sarah had found her perch. She'd settled into a large, uncomfortable armchair, phone held aloft, like a holy tablet. She was scrolling through her camera roll, searching for the perfect imagone of her looking caring and attentive, Elizabeth looking frail and confused. She found one from last Christmas. Her thumb hovered over the post button. "This is what she's reduced my poor mother-in-law to," she typed, the words appearing under the carefully selected photo. "A prisoner in her own home, preyed upon by those we trusted to care for her. We are heartbroken, and we will fight for her. We will not let her be a victim." She paused, then added the hashtags. Her weapons of choice. Number elder abuse. Number justice for family. Number protect our parents. Number greed. Number scam. She watched as the first like appeared, then another, and another. A small, triumphant smile touched her lips. The narrative was being written. Her narrative. Jacob saw his wife's absorption, and it only fueled his fire. "She's already poisoning the well." He gestured wildly toward Sarah. "The world will see this for what it is. A disgusting money grab." He turned back to Elizabeth, his voice rising to a bellow. "And you will help us. Or so help me God. I will do it myself. We're taking this to court. The first motion we file will be for emergency guardianship. We will prove you are mentally incompetent. We will put doctors on the stand who will testify that you have dementia, that you're senile, that you can be easily manipulated." He was crouched now, his hands on the arms of her wheelchair, trapping her. "You think Olivia is your friend? She's going to spend your money while you rot in a state facility. Is that what you want? To spend the last years of your life in a diaper, sharing a room with some drooling lunatic, staring at a concrete wall. Because that's where you're headed. You'll be locked away in a public ward before she can even cash the first check. Elizabeth looked into the twisted, furious face of her only son. She saw the desperation behind the anger, the panic of a man whose safety net had just been yanked away. She held his gaze, and then a single, perfect tear formed in the corner of her right eye. It clung to her lower lid for a moment, shimmering in the lamplight, before tracing a slow, deliberate path down the deep canyon of a wrinkle on her cheek. She said nothing. Her silence was not a void. It was a mirror. It reflected his own ugliness back at him, magnified. It was the ultimate denial, the ultimate rejection of his power. It was his fuel. "Say something!" he screamed, his voice cracking. He shook the wheelchair slightly. The tear dropped from her chin onto the cashmere blanket, a dark, star-shaped stain. He recoiled as if he'd been burned. He stood up straight, breathing heavily, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, dislodging it. "Fine," he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and a strange, childish hurt. "Have it your way. Don't say I didn't warn you." He stormed away, joining Sarah, who was now avidly reading the comments pouring in on her Instagram post. "They're with us, darling," she murmured, showing him the screen. "Everyone can see what a monster she is." Elizabeth sat alone in the vast cold room. The silence descended once more, heavier this time, freighted with threats and ultimatums. She slowly raised a trembling hand and wiped away the wet track of the single tear. Her expression in the dimness was unreadable, but it was not the expression of a victim. It was the expression of a strategist who had just successfully tested the enemy's defenses. That tear was not a sign of weakness. It was a weapon, perfectly deployed. It was the first drop of rain in a storm she had been planning for a decade. The shouting faded as Jacob and Sarah retreated to their wing of the house, their voices a low, angry murmur plotting legal battles and social media campaigns. Elizabeth remained in the living room. The cashmere blanket, a small island of warmth in the encroaching cold. Her gaze drifted to the massive, unlit fireplace, a black moor of stone and soot. The anger, the threats, the utter dismissal of her as a person with a mind of her own. It was all so familiar. It wasn't just Jacob's voice echoing in the cavernous room. It was another voice, deeper, colder, layered underneath his like a ghostly recording, a voice from 40 years ago, from a time when the bars of this gilded cage were first being forged. The memory rose unbidden, as sharp and clear as if it were happening now. The light is different. It's the soft, hazy sunlight of a Wednesday afternoon in 1985. A much younger Elizabeth. Her hair, a rich brown, her movements fluid and graceful, is arranging a bouquet of lilies in a crystal vase on the mantelpiece. The house smells of floor polish, and her Chanel number, woo. She hums a quiet tune, a small act of rebellion in the oppressive silence of the house. She feels a flicker of hope, a secret, illicit thrill. Tucked inside her apron pocket is a folded brochure. It's cheap paper, a stark contrast to the expensive world around her. Aspen Creek Community College. Fall semester. Introduction to Sociology. Introduction to Art History. The words are a promise of a world beyond these walls. A world where she is more than just Mrs. Richard Blackwood. The front door opens and closes, the sound heavy, authoritative. Richard enters the living room. He is handsome in that sharp, predatory way, his suit immaculate, his presence sucking the air from the room. He doesn't greet her. He inspects her work. "The lilies are too ostentatious, Elizabeth," he says, his voice smooth but with an edge of steel. He plucks one of the offending flowers from the vase and holds it up. "They look funereal. Tone it down. We have the Hendersons coming for dinner on Friday." We want to project elegance, not grief. He drops the lily onto the table, bruising its perfect white petals. He moves to the mail, a small pile she had left on a silver tray. He sorts through it with practiced efficiency, discarding junk mail, setting bills aside. Then he stops. He's holding the letter addressed to her, the one with the community college's return address. He slits it open with his thumb. What's this? He pulls out the brochure she had so carefully studied. He unfolds it, his eyes scanning the course list, a small, derisive smile playing on his lips. Aspen Creek Community College. He says the name as if it's a distasteful joke. Elizabeth's heart plummets. She feels the blood drain from her face. I was just looking, she stammers, her hands twisting the fabric of her apron. I thought, maybe a class. Something to do. Richard laughs. It's not a warm sound. It's cold and dismissive. The laugh of a man swatting away an annoying fly. Something to do? He repeats, his eyes locking onto hers. They are not cruel eyes, not overtly. They are worse. They are indifferent. You have plenty to do, my dear. You have this house to run. You have Jacob to raise. You have my reputation to maintain. You have a family. That is your job. A full-time one. He walks toward the fireplace. You don't have time for silly little hobbies, Elizabeth. You don't have the aptitude for academic pursuits. Your mind isn't built for it. It's built for other things. For beauty. For loyalty. For running my home. He holds the brochure over the empty hearth. Don't fill your head with this nonsense. It will only make you unhappy. With a flick of his wrist, he tosses the brochure into the fireplace. He takes a lighter from his pocket, the gold one she gave him for their anniversary, and ignites the corner of the paper. Elizabeth watches it burn. She watches the words sociology and art history curl and blacken. She watches the image of smiling, hopeful students turn to grey ash. With the flames, her own small secret hope shrivels and dies. She feels herself shrinking, her posture slumping, her very essence seeming to diminish in the heat of his casual cruelty. He had not shouted. He had not hit her. He had simply erased a part of her. And he had done it with a smile. Her world was beautiful. It was expensive. It was admired by all their friends. And it was a prison built just for her. Its walls papered with his expectations. Its bars forged from his casual contempt. The memory of the flames fades, but the feeling of being erased remains cold and hard in her chest. Back in the chill of the 2025 living room, Elizabeth looks from the black fireplace to her own hands, resting in her lap. They are old hands, wrinkled and spotted, but they are not trembling anymore. The fear that had defined her for so long, the fear of Richard's disapproval, of his cold laugh, had been buried with him. What was left was something else entirely, something forged in the fire that had consumed her dreams. It was a cold, patient, and utterly unshakable resolve. Jacob was his father's son, arrogant and blind. He thought he was fighting a frail, silent old woman. He had no idea he was fighting the ghost of every dream his father had ever killed, and that ghost had had a very long time to plan her revenge. The quiet in the Blackwood residence was no longer peaceful. It was the heavy, breathless silence of a vacuum, a space where sound was afraid to exist. For a week, since the reading of the will, the grand old house had become a mausoleum of unspoken words. Elizabeth sat in her chair by the window, not looking at the manicured lawns, but seeing the reflection of the room behind Hera's gilded cage she had occupied for a lifetime. The silence was broken by the crunch of gravel. A courier van, white and unmarked, pulled up the long driveway. Olivia, ever present, ever calm, met the young man at the door. He held out a stiff, oversized cardboard envelope and a digital scanner. Package for Elizabeth Blackwood. Signature required. Uh, Olivia signed her own name on the screen. The man nodded and left, his footsteps crunching away into the silence again. Olivia held the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. It was from Sterling Crofton Gable, a name that dripped money and aggression. She walked into the sitting room and placed it gently on the small table beside Elizabeth. It's from Jacob's lawyers, Mrs. Blackwood. Elizabeth didn't turn from the window. Her reflection showed a flicker of something in her eyes. Not fear, but a weary sort of recognition. Open it, Olivia. Olivia's fingers were deft as she slit the thick paper. Inside, a sheaf of documents, crisp and heavy with the weight of officialdom, slid out. The cover page was stark. Petition for emergency conservatorship. Olivia's breath caught, but she kept her voice steady as she read the key phrases aloud, her tone clinical, trying to strip the words of their poison. Hereby petition the court. On the grounds of significant cognitive decline. A demonstrated history of erratic and unpredictable behavior. Extreme susceptibility to undue influence and manipulation. Each phrase was a hammer blow, an attempt to shatter the identity of a woman who had endured decades of quiet erasure. Elizabeth finally turned from the window. Her face was a placid mask, but her hands, resting on the arms of her wheelchair, were still. Not trembling. Still. They are trying to have you declared incompetent, Olivia summarized, her professional facade cracking slightly with anger. They want to take control of your assets, your decisions, everything. It's a legal assault, designed to intimidate and overwhelm. Elizabeth nodded slowly. Show me. Olivia handed her the papers. Elizabeth's eyes scanned the pages, a lifetime of legal dramas and business dealings with Richard having made her fluent in this language of veiled threats and character assassination. She saw the affidavits. A statement from a gardener Jacob had hired 2 months ago, claiming Mrs. Blackwood often seemed confused about the time of day. A note from a distant cousin, recalling a time Elizabeth had forgotten her name at a Christmas party 3 years prior. Each instance was a tiny, twisted piece of truth, woven into a tapestry of lies. And the other front? Elizabeth asked, her voice quiet. Olivia hesitated, then pulled out her phone. She opened Instagram. Sarah's profile was a curated collage of tasteful wealth and feigned sincerity. But the recent posts were different. A picture of Sarah holding Jacob's hand, both looking pensively towards the camera. The caption was a masterclass in manipulation. It's so hard to watch someone you love fade away. We are fighting for you, Mom. We will protect you from those who would take advantage of your gentle heart. Elder abuse, family first, save our mom, protect the vulnerable. Below it, the comments poured in. A tide of misinformed sympathy. Stay strong, you're doing the right thing. My heart breaks for you. Sending prayers. That nurse should be investigated. This is disgusting. And at Tem, she's building a narrative, Olivia said, her voice tight with disgust. And it's working. She swiped to a new screen, a link to the Westwood Gazette's online blog. The headline was sensational. Local philanthropist's son fights to save ailing mother from predatory caregiver. The article was a thinly veiled rewrite of Sarah's social media posts, quoting an anonymous source close to the family who described Elizabeth as a fading, fragile woman, easily confused and manipulated by her new nurse. Elizabeth stared at the screen, at the picture of herself taken a year ago, looking frail in the garden. She looked at the comments, at the headline. The world was seeing the exact picture her family wanted them to see. The silent, helpless lamb. She handed the phone back to Olivia. Her expression was unreadable. She had lived in a prison of one man's making for 50 years. Now, her own son was building her a new one, with walls of public opinion and bars of legal jargon. But he had made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed the prisoner was the same person she had always been. He didn't realize that the silence he had always mistaken for weakness had, over the years, been forging itself into a weapon. A few days later, the cameras appeared. Small, white, unobtrusive domes, installed in the corners of the main living areas and, most insultingly, in her own bedroom. Jacob had informed her through his lawyer that it was a precautionary measure to ensure her safety and well-being, a transparent lie to gather evidence for his lawsuit. The house was no longer a cage. It was a specimen jar. Elizabeth felt the invisible eyes on her constantly, a chilling echo of Richard's possessive gaze. Olivia's routine didn't change. She was the consummate professional, her movements efficient, her voice calm and soothing, a perfect performance for their unseen audience. She attached the blood pressure cuff to Elizabeth's arm, her actions deliberate and slow. "All right, Mrs. Blackwood, let's see how we're doing today," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet room. She pumped the bulb, her eyes on the gauge. 145 over 90. It's a little high. We need to be more diligent with your diet. Less salt. And I want you to try and get a little more rest." As she spoke, she adjusted the cuff, her fingers brushing against Elizabeth's hand, which lay limp on the armrest. It was a perfectly natural movement. But in that brief, clinical touch, a small, tightly folded piece of paper passed from her palm into Elizabeth's. It was no bigger than a sugar packet. "I've also written down the new dosage for your evening medication," Olivia continued, her voice never wavering as she removed the cuff. "I'll leave it here on your nightstand. It's important you take it exactly as prescribed." She placed a decoy piece of paper on the nightstand, a list of medications, then gathered her equipment and left the room. Elizabeth didn't move. She sat for a long time, the tiny note, a secret warmth in her cold hand. She knew the cameras had night vision. She knew they likely had audio. She had to wait. Hours later, when the house was settled in the deep quiet of the late night, Elizabeth moved. She wheeled herself into the attached bathroom, the one place Jacob hadn't dared to place a camera, citing a flimsy respect for her privacy. Under the harsh glare of the vanity light, she carefully unfolded the paper. It wasn't a dosage, it was a report, typed in a tiny font, concise and brutal. Subject: Jacob R. Blackwood. Financial exposure estimate: Blackwood Development Group, LLC. Asterisk. Asterisk. 3 primary ventures currently leveraged. 1. The Pinnacle at Aspen Creek. Asterisk. Asterisk. Luxury condo project. Stalled post. Foundation due to failed environmental impact review. $15 million loan from First National Commercial Bank now in technical default. 2. Riverwalk Lofts. Asterisk. Asterisk. Warehouse conversion. 60% of units unsold. Operating at a net loss of approx. $80 K month. Carrying loan requires a balloon payment of $8, 5M, due in 90 days. 3. Northgate Retail Plaza. Asterisk. Asterisk. Anchor tenant. Big box electronics store, declared bankruptcy. 45% vacancy rate. Unable to service debt with current rental income. Personal assets. Asterisk. Asterisk. Residence and vacation properties leveraged as collateral against a secondary bridge loan of $4 million from a private equity firm, Vulture Capital Partners. Interest rate: 18%. Payments are 60 days in arrears. Summary: Asterisk. Asterisk. Subject is facing imminent financial collapse. Total estimated debt exceeds liquid assets by a factor of 3. The inheritance is not a desire. It is a lifeline. He is not just greedy. He is drowning. Elizabeth read it twice. The cold, hard facts settled into place. This wasn't a son's misguided attempt to protect his family's legacy. This was the desperate thrashing of a man about to go under. He wasn't trying to get his hands on her money for the sake of power. He was trying to plug a hole in his own sinking ship. He had learned his father's arrogance, but not his cunning. Richard had built an empire on calculated risks. Jacob had built a house of cards on reckless gambles. And now, the wind was blowing. A cold resolve, harder than steel, settled in Elizabeth's heart. She tore the small paper into minuscule pieces, dropped them into the toilet, and flushed. She watched them swirl and disappear. For the first time, she understood the full shape of the battlefield, and she knew exactly where she needed to look for ammunition. That night, the house was a tomb. The cameras watched empty rooms, their little red lights blinking like malevolent eyes in the dark. But their gaze did not extend to the narrow, steep staircase at the end of the second-floor hallway, leading to the one place in the house Richard had never allowed to be modernized. The attic. "The lock is rusted shut," he had always said, his voice sharp with irritation if she ever glanced that way. "There's nothing up there but dust and rats. Nothing for you." For 50 years she had obeyed. She had accepted it as another locked door in her life. Tonight she would not, moving with a slow, deliberate strength that contradicted the fragile image she presented to the world. Elizabeth rose from her wheelchair. Her legs, stiff from disuse, ached in protest. But she ignored them. She leaned on the wall for support, her breath coming in shallow gasps. But she took one step, and then another. Each one was an act of rebellion. She reached the bottom of the attic stairs and began to climb. The air grew cooler, smelling of dry rot and forgotten time. At the top, a simple wooden door stood before her. In the center was an old, ornate iron lock. She reached for the silver locket she had worn around her neck every day for 40 years. Richard had given it to her on their 5th anniversary. He thought it held a tiny, faded picture of himself. He was wrong. Her fingers, though wrinkled, were nimble. She opened the locket, and instead of a photograph, she tipped a small antique brass key into her palm. It was thin and skeletal. She took a deep breath. The memory of Richard's anger, a cold ghost at her back. A flashback, sharp as broken glass. She was 30, standing right here, her hand tentatively on the doorknob. Richard had come up behind her, his footsteps silent on the runner. He hadn't said a word. He had simply grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like a vice. His face, usually controlled, was distorted with a purple, blotchy rage she had never seen before or since. "Stay out of the attic, Elizabeth," he had hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "I mean it. There is nothing up there for you." The fear had been paralyzing, the absolute, primal terror of a man whose control had been challenged, whose secret had been brushed against. For years, the memory of that rage had been enough to keep her away. It was a brand on her soul. But now, standing in the same spot, the old fear was just a faint, cold echo. It had no more power over her than a bad dream upon waking. It had been cauterized and burned away by a new, cold fire. Resolve. She slid the key into the lock. It didn't grate. It didn't resist. It turned with a soft, well-oiled click. Richard hadn't lied because the lock was rusted. He had lied because it wasn't. The door swung inward on silent hinges, releasing a wave of stale, cold air. The attic was vast, a cathedral of shadows under the high-peaked roof. Dust motes danced in the single beam of moonlight slanting from a grimy dormer window. It was filled with the ghosts of 100 years forgotten furniture draped in white sheets, stacks of old magazines, a child's rocking horse standing silent and still. In the center of the room, like an altar, sat a large, sea-worn trunk. It was bound with leather straps and brass fittings, the kind a person would use for a long ocean voyage. She walked towards it, her steps steady. She knelt, her knees cracking in protest, and ran her hands over the worn leather. The clasps were not locked. She lifted them, the sound echoing in the cavernous silence. She raised the heavy lid. The scent of mothballs and cedar filled the air. On top lay a stack of moth-eaten woolen blankets. Beneath them, a wedding dress, yellowed with age her mother's. She set it aside gently, and then she saw them. They were not personal diaries, not sentimental journals filled with a man's thoughts and feelings. Richard had no use for such things. They were ledgers, a dozen of them, hard-bound in dark green and black leather, their spines stamped with gold-leafed years. 1975, 1976, 1977. They were his real business records. The ones his accountants never saw. The ones that told the true story of how the Blackwood Empire was built. Her hands, as steady as a surgeon's, lifted the first one. She opened it. The pages were filled with Richard's precise, meticulous script. A litany of numbers, transactions, names. It was a language she knew well. For years, her one approved intellectual pursuit had been managing the household accounts. She could read a balance sheet as easily as a novel. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning, searching. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she trusted the instinct that had led her here. The gut feeling that the root of Richard's rage about this room was buried in these pages. She worked through the ledgers for 1,980, 1,981, and then, in the volume for 1,982, she found it. Tucked into a pocket inside the back cover was a smaller, separate cash book. The cover was simply marked discretionary. Inside, the meticulous accounting continued. But this was different. These were off-the-books payments. Cash withdrawals with vague notations. Then, a name appeared. A recurring name. Annabelle Hayes. The first entry was small. October 1982. A.H. Consulting. $500. Then another, a month later. November 1982. A.H. Bonus. $1,000. The payments continued, growing in frequency and amount over several years. The notations were always vague. Corporate euphemisms that screamed of secrecy. Project support. Client retention. Goodwill. Elizabeth's face was stone. She was looking at the documented history of her husband's affair, not in the passionate words of a love letter, but in the cold, transactional language he understood. This was how he valued the people in his life, as assets or liabilities. She kept turning the pages, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The payments spanned 4 years. Then, in the final pages of the 1,986 ledger, the pattern changed. The payments became larger, more erratic. The notations more desperate. Special disbursement. Contingency fund. And then the final entry. It was dated May 12th, 1986. It was the largest payment of all. A single line item for $20,000. Next to it, Richard had made a chillingly simple 2-word note. Asset liquidation. The date. May 12th. It struck a chord deep in her memory. With trembling fingers, she pulled the phone Olivia had insisted she keep from her robe pocket. Her old fingers, clumsy with technology, tapped at the screen. She opened a web browser and typed, Aspen Creek Bridge, May 1986, asterisk. An old article from the local paper's digital archives appeared on the screen. The headline was stark. Local woman in tragic suicide. The first paragraph was all she needed to read. The body of a 32-year-old woman, identified as Annabelle Hayes, was recovered from the Aspen Creek Gorge early this morning. Authorities have ruled the death a suicide, stating she jumped from the bridge sometime late last night, May 12th. Elizabeth stared at the screen, then at the ledger. The date, the name, the final brutal entry, asset liquidation, asterisk. It wasn't a breakup. It wasn't the end of an affair. It was the closing of an account, the disposal of an inconvenient asset. Richard hadn't just cheated on her. He had systematically destroyed a woman, financially, emotionally, and then he had documented her destruction in his ledger, like the closing of a failed business venture. The attic was no longer just a dusty repository of old memories. It was a tomb, and she was holding the murderer's confession. A cold, clear purpose settled over her. The time for being a silent lamb was over. It was time for the wolf to answer for his sins. The heavy oak door to the study swung inward without a sound. Jacob stood on the threshold, silhouetted against the dim hallway light. He had a smile on his face, the kind a man wears when he believes he has already won. It was a conqueror's smile, stretched thin by impatience. He stepped inside, letting the door click shut behind him, the sound echoing the finality he felt in his heart. The room smelled of old paper and lemon polish, a scent he'd always associated with his father's authority. Tonight he felt it was his own. He looked at his mother, a small, frail figure behind the massive mahogany desk. The large, leather-bound chair seemed to swallow her whole. The only light came from a single green-shaded banker's lamp, casting her face in a mix of light and deep shadow, making it impossible to read her expression. "Mother," Jacob began, his voice smooth, magnanimous. "I'm glad you called me. I'm glad you've decided to be reasonable. It saves us all a great deal of unpleasantness." He walked across the expensive Persian rug, his polished shoes making no sound, and settled into the armchair opposite her. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, the picture of a man in complete control. "I've spoken with the lawyers again this morning," he continued, steepling his fingers. "And frankly, it's an open and shut case. They have the preliminary reports from the doctors I consulted. Cognitive decline, susceptibility to undue influence. These aren't just opinions, Mother. They are medical facts. A judge will see them as such. The emergency guardianship will be granted within the week. After that, annulling this ridiculous will is a formality." Elizabeth remained silent. Her hands, wrinkled and dotted with age spots, were folded neatly on the polished wood of the desk. She didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on something beyond him. Perhaps a memory on the far wall. Jacob's smile tightened. Her silence was irritating. It was the same silent treatment she'd given his father, a passive-aggressive refusal to engage that had always driven Richard Blackwood into a rage. But Jacob believed he was smarter than his father, more patient. "And the media campaign," he went on, a note of pride creeping into his voice. "Sarah has been brilliant, absolutely brilliant. She's framed the narrative perfectly. Elder abuse, predatory caregiver. It's all over the local news blogs. A few national ones are sniffing around. People are outraged on your behalf. They see you as a victim. They see that nurse, Olivia, for what she is, a parasite, a vulture." He paused, waiting for a reaction, a flinch, a tear, something. He got nothing, just the steady, quiet rhythm of her breathing. "So you see," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This can all go away. We can make it go away. You sign a new will, the correct will, the one father would have wanted. We fire the nurse, quietly. Give her a small severance to avoid a fuss. A gag order, of course. Then I'll call off the lawyers. Sarah will issue a statement saying there was a misunderstanding that has been resolved within the family. The story dies. Everything goes back to normal. Your life continues on, peacefully. You'll be looked after, properly, by family. He leaned back again. His victory speech concluded. He felt a surge of satisfaction. He wasn't just securing his inheritance, he was saving the family name. He was doing what his father would have done, only better, cleaner. He was protecting his mother from her own foolishness. Still, she was silent. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. The seconds stretched out, each tick a small hammer blow against Jacob's patience. "Mother," he finally said, his tone sharpening. "Did you hear me? I'm offering you a way out. The only way out. Don't you have anything to say?" Slowly, Elizabeth raised her head. The light caught her eyes, and for the first time, Jacob saw they weren't vacant or confused. They were clear and cold as a winter sky. She didn't speak. Instead, her hand moved with a steadiness that seemed impossible for her age. She reached for a single sheet of paper that was lying face down on the desk. With a faint whisper of movement, she slid it across the polished surface. It stopped just inches from his steepled fingers. He looked down at it. A photocopy. The paper was thick, high quality. The text was sharp, the handwriting of an old-world accountant, precise and unforgiving. It was a ledger page, columns of dates, descriptions, and figures. His eyes scanned the familiar script. It was his father's. And then he saw the name, Annabelle Hayes. He saw a series of payments, large ones. His breath caught in his throat. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. He remembered whispers, closed doors, his father's tense moods. He had been a boy, maybe 14 or 15. He knew his father had indiscretions. He'd always known. His eyes jumped to the final entry on the page. The date was seared into his memory. Next to it, in his father's hand, were 2 words: asset liquidation. Olsay. The sum was staggering. And below it, in a different, fainter ink, a single, chilling note. Final. The colour drained from Jacob's face. The smugness, the confidence. It all evaporated like mist in a harsh sun. The room suddenly felt airless. He could feel a cold sweat prickling his hairline. He looked up at his mother. Her expression hadn't changed. "Your father," she said, and her voice was not the thin, reedy whisper of an old woman. It was level, measured, devoid of all emotion, was a meticulous man. Jacob's mouth was dry. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He swallowed, the sound loud in the oppressive silence. He had affairs," he stammered, the words tumbling out, weak and pathetic. He was no longer a conqueror. He was a boy again, caught in a lie. "I knew. I was just a boy. He told me. He told me it was just business. Complicated business. I helped him sometimes, answering the phone, making excuses. To protect you. I did it to protect you. To protect the family from scandal." He was pleading now, his voice cracking. He looked at her, searching for a flicker of the maternal sympathy he had always taken for granted, the unconditional forgiveness he believed was his birthright. He found none. Her eyes were like chips of ice. She leaned forward slightly. The movement was small, but it carried the weight of an earthquake. The chair groaned under her. "An affair, Jacob?" she repeated, the question a shard of glass in the quiet room. Is that what you call it? Is that the clean, simple word you use to put a name to the rot that sat at the heart of this family? She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The quiet intensity of it pinned him to his chair. He didn't have an affair with Annabelle Hayes. He had a 2-year campaign to destroy her. An affair ends. What he did to her, that was eternal. Jacob shook his head, a gesture of denial. No, you don't understand. Father, he could be difficult, but he wasn't a monster. She was trying to blackmail him. He told me. He was protecting us. A sound escaped Elizabeth's lips. It might have been a laugh, but it was entirely without humour. It was the sound of something breaking. He told you. And you believed him. Of course you did. You wanted the cars, the schools, the trust fund. You didn't want to see the foundations they were built on. She paused, letting the accusation hang in the air between them. He didn't just pay her, Jacob. He bled her dry, after she threatened to expose him not for the affair, but for the fraud he was committing in his business, the fraud she helped him with before he betrayed her. He began to dismantle her life. Piece by piece. Her voice was a slow, deliberate cadence, each word a hammer blow. He used shell corporations to buy out the debt of her family's small business, then called in the loans, bankrupting them. He spread rumors among her friends, whispers of instability, of theft. He had her followed. He isolated her until she had no one to turn to, no one to believe her. He broke her spirit, drained her bank accounts, and when she had nothing left, absolutely nothing, he made that final payment. Asset liquidation. He wasn't paying for her silence, Jacob. He was buying her life. The coroner's report called it a suicide, a tragic leap from a bridge. Your father called it a sound investment. The horror of it settled over Jacob. He felt sick. The polished study, the family portraits on the wall, the scent of old money it all seemed grotesque, a mausoleum built on a woman's soul. He stared at the ledger page, at his father's neat, cruel handwriting. Elizabeth let the silence stretch, letting the poison do its work. He looked up, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrible understanding. Then she delivered the final blow. Annabelle had a daughter, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, making him lean in to hear it. A little girl. She was smart, just like her mother. Before the end, before your father's liquidation was complete, Annabelle sent her away. To a distant relative. She gave her up to protect her, to give her a chance at a life away from the Blackwood name. Jacob's breath hitched. He felt a sudden, inexplicable dread. He could hear a faint sound from the hallway, a soft, gentle humming, a tune he couldn't quite place. It was the sound he'd heard for months, the sound of his mother's nurse going about her duties. Elizabeth's eyes locked onto his. Imagine my surprise, Jacob. After all these years, when I finally found her, all grown up, working as a nurse, so dedicated, so compassionate. Her name is Olivia. The world tilted on its axis. Jacob felt as if he'd been shot. The air rushed out of his lungs in a silent gasp. The humming from the hallway was louder now, closer. It wasn't just a sound. It was a presence, a ghost. He half turned in his chair, his eyes darting toward the closed door, as if he expected to see a phantom standing there. Olivia, the quiet, efficient nurse, the daughter of the woman his father had destroyed. He whipped his head back to face his mother. His mind was a maelstrom of confusion and terror. She put you up to this, he stammered, his voice thin, reedy. This is her. She's been poisoning you against me. She's manipulating you for revenge. The will. The lawsuit. My God, you are being manipulated. He tried to stand, to reassert some semblance of control, but his legs felt like water. He was grasping for the old narrative, the one where his mother was a fragile victim and he was her protector. It was the only version of reality that made sense. Elizabeth watched him struggle, her expression unreadable. The frail woman he thought he knew was gone, peeled away layer by layer until only this stranger of stone and ice remained. When she spoke again, her voice was the final gust of wind that shatters a window pane. You think she manipulated me? The question was so cold it burned. Jacob, she said, and for the first time she used his name like a weapon. Look at me. He forced his eyes to meet hers. There was no confusion there, no weakness. There was only a terrifying, brilliant clarity. Your father had his first major stroke 10 years ago. It was small, but it was enough. It put him in a hospital bed for 2 weeks. It gave me the key to his office. It gave me the password to his private computer. The one he always kept locked. I wasn't looking for evidence of affairs, Jacob. I was looking for the truth I had suspected for 30 years. She leaned back in the chair, a queen upon her throne. The story poured from her, not as a confession, but as a final damning verdict. And I found it. I found Annabelle. I found the ledgers. And I found out about her daughter. For 5 years, I searched for her. I used your father's monial money to hire the best private investigators. They found dead ends, changed names, lost trails. But I am more patient than your father ever was. And eventually I found her. A quiet, unassuming nurse working 2 states away, trying to pay off student loans. Oh, Jacob was shaking his head, a silent, rhythmic denial. This couldn't be real. I didn't just find her, Jacob, Elizabeth continued, her voice a relentless tide. I went to her. I sat in her small apartment that smelled of disinfectant and cheap coffee, and I told her everything. I showed her the ledgers. I showed her the proof of what was done to her mother. I showed her the face of the man who signed the order for her mother's liquidation. Her eyes bored into him. She didn't want revenge. She wanted peace. But I wanted a reckoning. So I made her an offer. I told her I would give her the justice her mother was denied. I hired her. I brought her into this house. Under your nose. Under Sarah's condescending gaze. The pieces of the last year clicked into place in Jacob's mind, forming a picture of such monstrous, calculated deceit that he felt he was losing his mind. Olivia's quiet deference. Her constant presence. The will. Every piece of evidence. Elizabeth's voice was ice. Every recorded conversation where you threatened me. Every time you screamed about putting me in a state-run home. Every document Olivia found in my medical files. It was all staged. It was all my idea. I coached her on what to say, how to act. I told her to be the perfect victim, because I knew you wouldn't be able to resist the role of the bully. Your greed, your arrogance, your desperate need to feel like your father. It was all so predictable. You were the main gear in my machine, Jacob, and you didn't even know it. The truth landed with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't the player. He was the pawn. His mother wasn't the silent lamb. She was the wolf. This isn't her revenge, Elizabeth said, her voice dropping to a final, chilling whisper. It's mine. Jacob stumbled backward, his leg catching on the armchair. It tipped over, crashing to the floor with a heavy thud that broke the spell. The sound of his own breathing was ragged, torn. He stared at the woman behind the desk. The frail, senile creature he had planned to discard was gone. In her place sat a strategist so ruthless, so patient. It defied comprehension. A mind forged in decades of silent suffering, now honed into a perfect, merciless weapon. You're a monster, he whispered, the words barely audible. A flicker of something not triumph, but a deep, ancient sorrow passed through Elizabeth's eyes. "I am what your father made me," she replied, her voice flat. "And I am what you allowed me to become." He had to get out. He turned and fled, yanking the study door open and stumbling into the hall. He didn't look back. He ran, past the silent portraits of his ancestors, past the ticking grandfather clock that now seemed to be counting down the seconds of his ruin. As his hand closed around the heavy brass handle of the front door, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. He burst out into the cool night air, gasping for breath. The phone buzzed again, and again, a relentless, insistent vibration. Then came the pings, one after another, a cascade of notifications, an electronic scream. He fumbled the phone out of his pocket, his hands shaking. The screen was a blaze of alerts. A Twitch notification at the top. Crimson Crimes is live. The Blackwood Legacy of Lies. An exclusive exposé. The viewer count was already climbing past 100,000. Below it, news alerts from every major outlet. The Sentinel. Leaked ledgers reveal decades of fraud by late tycoon Richard Blackwood. Forbes. Inside the Blackwood scandal. Anonymous source blows whistle on financial and moral corruption. Knight. Blackwood heir. Implicated in cover-up of death of Annabelle Hayes. His phone rang, the screen flashing with Sarah's face. He answered it, a sense of unreality washing over him. "Jacob!" Her voice was a hysterical shriek, thin and tinny through the speaker. "What is happening? My Instagram. My God. Jacob. My phone is exploding. They're everywhere." He could hear her frantic scrolling, her panicked breaths. "They're calling me a ghoul, a grifter. Number Blackwood blood money. Number justice for Annabelle. It's on every post, thousands of them. The brands, my partnerships, they're dropping me. I just got 3 emails. 3. Jacob, what did you do?" He couldn't answer. He was staring at his own phone, at a new notification that had just popped up. It was an email. From a law firm he didn't recognize. The subject line was simple. Notice of transfer. The body of the email was a single sentence. "All assets previously held in the Blackwood Family Trust have been irrevocably transferred to the newly established Annabelle Hayes Foundation for Victims of Economic Abuse." The Blackwood Empire, his legacy, his father's life's work. It wasn't just under attack. It was gone, dissolved, given away. It had imploded in a matter of minutes, a digital guillotine severing his past, his present, and his future in one clean, catastrophic stroke. He slid down the cold stone of the porch steps, the phone slipping from his nerveless fingers and clattering onto the driveway. The digital screaming continued, a chorus of ruin from the small glowing screen in the darkness. The digital guillotine fell, not with the silence of a blade, but with the deafening roar of a million notifications. For Jacob Blackwood, the world didn't end. It simply inverted. The phone in his hand, once a tool of command, became a vessel of poison. It buzzed incessantly on the polished mahogany of his lawyer's desk, a frantic, dying insect. Each vibration was another comment, another share, another news alert. Blackwood Empire crumbles. Asterisk, asterisk, number Blackwood scandal. Trends worldwide. Asterisk, asterisk. Son's greed. Father's sins. Asterisk. His lawyer, a man named Davies with eyes that had seen every shade of human disgrace, pushed a glass of water across the desk. It remained untouched. "They've dropped the suit, Jacob," Davies said. his voice flat, devoid of the usual feigned sympathy. This was damage control of the most hopeless kind. There's no case. There never was. The petition for guardianship has been withdrawn with prejudice. You can't file it again. Jacob stared at the wood grain, tracing a knot with his eyes. So we fight the slander. We sue this streamer. We sue every news outlet that ran the story. We do nothing, Davies cut in, the finality in his tone as sharp as broken glass. Jacob, listen to me. There is no we. The evidence your mother provided, the ledger, the recordings, it's ironclad. A lawsuit would be an act of public self-immolation. You'd be subject to discovery. Every dirty deal Richard ever made, every skeleton in your own closet. It would all come out under oath. The firm cannot, will not, represent you in such a matter. The buzzing stopped. A call was coming through. Robert Peterson. Asterisk. His primary investor. Jacob's hand twitched. He let it go to voicemail. My partners. Jacob began, his voice a hoarse whisper. They've already called, Davies said, steepling his fingers. The morality clause in your partnership agreements is being invoked. They're severing ties, unwinding their investments. It's a cascade, Jacob. The first domino has already hit the last one. Jacob finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot and uncomprehending. My mother, she couldn't. She did, Davies said simply. She wasn't a victim in a game, Jacob. She was the one who set up the board. And you played your part perfectly. The drive home was a blur of hostile landscapes. Faces on passing buses seemed to sneer. The digital billboards he usually saw as symbols of his own ambition now felt like giant, illuminated wanted posters. When he walked into his own house, the silence was worse than the noise. Sarah was sitting on one of their white Italian leather sofas, a tablet in her lap. Her face pale and streaked with mascara. Her own digital world, the curated life of hashtags and filter shad, turned on her with the ferocity of a starved wolf pack. They're calling me a ghoul, she said, not looking at him. Her voice was hollow. A grave robber. They found my old posts. The ones about number elder abuse awareness. They're using them against me, tearing me apart. My sponsors. They've all terminated my contracts. Via email. Not even a phone call. Jacob didn't answer. He walked to the bar, poured a whiskey with a trembling hand, and drank it in one searing gulp. This is your fault, Sarah hissed, finally looking at him, her eyes filled with a venom he had never seen before. You and your obsession. It's my birthright, Sarah. She's a frail old woman, Sarah. You couldn't just let it go. You had to push. You had to threaten her. She was my mother, Jacob roared, slamming the glass down so hard it cracked. She owed me. She owed us. She owed you nothing, Sarah screamed back, jumping to her feet. She owed you nothing but the truth you helped your father bury. You stood there and watched him destroy that woman, Annabelle. You admitted it. You were his little soldier, protecting the family. Look where it got us. Your father's sins just became our bankruptcy. He stared at her. The carefully constructed artifice of their life, their marriage, their shared ambition, was dissolving in the acid of failure. He saw her not as his wife, but as just another business partner cutting her losses. The next few days were a slow, agonizing bleed. The calls stopped coming. The emails became purely transactional legal notices, contract terminations. Letters from the bank. His world, once a bustling metropolis of deals and influence, had become a barren desert. He was an exile in his own life. He found himself driving with no destination in mind, the muscle memory of his hands on the wheel taking him through the familiar manicured streets of Aspen Creek. He drove past the country club where his membership had been suspended indefinitely. He drove past the offices of his former partners, the windows dark and indifferent. And then he found himself on the long, tree-lined drive leading to the house. His father's house. His house. But it wasn't. The first thing he saw was the sign. A stark, professionally printed "for sale" sign hammered into the pristine lawn. It felt like a physical blow. He stopped the car in the middle of the road, the engine humming. He got out, his legs unsteady, and walked towards it. The wind was cold, rustling the leaves of the ancient oaks that stood like silent, unimpressed witnesses. There, at the bottom of the sign, was the realtor's name. It wasn't a company. It was a person. Olivia Hayes, owner, executor. Owner. The word was a key, turning in a lock deep inside him, opening a door to a vast, empty room. It wasn't just the inheritance. It wasn't just the money. It was the name. The legacy. The very ground beneath his feet. It had all been taken. No, not taken. Given. Given to the daughter of the woman his father had destroyed. He stumbled back to his car, fumbling for his phone. His fingers, clumsy and thick, scrolled through his contacts. He found her name, listed simply as Mother. He pressed the call button and held the phone to his ear. A desperate, primal need to hear her voice, to scream, to beg, to understand. He didn't get an answer. He didn't get voicemail. He got a sound he hadn't heard in decades. A three-note, repeating tone. High, low, high. The sound of a number that no longer exists. Disconnected. Deleted. Erased. The severing was absolute. He sat in his car, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the electronic pulse of his own non-existence. He hadn't just lost an inheritance. He had lost his past and his future. He had been written out of the story. The silence on the other end of the line was the sound of his own life turning to ash. It was a hollow, devastating, and complete end. A reckoning delivered not by a court of law, but by a quiet, patient woman in a wheelchair who had finally stood up. Months later, the air tasted of salt and peace. The sun, a great bleeding orange, was sinking into the vast, placid expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The only sound was the gentle sigh of the waves on the shore far below, and the occasional cry of a gull. There were no ticking clocks, no buzzing phones, no ghosts whispering from the walls. The condo was minimalist, a space defined by light and air rather than possessions. Its walls were white. Its furniture simple and clean. It was a place designed for breathing. Elizabeth sat on the balcony in a comfortable chair, not a wheelchair. She didn't need it much anymore. The strength she had hoarded for a decade, the steely resilience she had hidden beneath a veneer of frailty, was now hers to spend freely. She used it for walks on the beach with Olivia, for reading the books she'd always wanted to read, for simply sitting and watching the tide roll in and out. Olivia came out and set 2 glasses of iced tea on the small table between them. She had changed, too. The guarded tension in her shoulders was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. She was no longer just a nurse or an instrument of vengeance. She was the director of a future. The Annabelle Hayes Foundation received its official non-profit status today, Olivia said, her voice calm, matter of fact. The final transfer of the Blackwood assets is complete. Our first round of grants goes out next week. Elizabeth nodded, taking a slow sip of her tea. Tell me about them. One is for a shelter in Chicago that specializes in finding emergency housing for victims of economic abuse. Another is a legal aid fund in Texas for women fighting to get their names off fraudulent loans their partners took out. And one is a personal grant For a woman in Oregon, her ex-husband was a contractor. He secretly remortgaged their house, ran his business into the ground, and left her with a mountain of debt and a foreclosure notice. She has 3 children. Olivia paused, looking out at the horizon. She said she felt like she'd been erased. We're paying off the debt. The house is hers now, free and clear. Elizabeth looked at Olivia, at the determined set of her jaw, the clear purpose in her eyes. She saw Annabelle in her, not the victim Richard had created, but the strong, intelligent woman she must have been before him. Vengeance had been the catalyst, the fire that burned the old world down. But this was the new world being built from the ashes. It was better. Good, Elizabeth said softly. It was all that needed to be said. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the water, painting the sky in deepening shades of purple and pink. When the last sliver of light was gone, Elizabeth picked up her tablet from the table. Her movements were deliberate, precise. She unlocked the screen, her fingers navigating the smooth glass with an ease that belied her age. She opened her cloud storage, a lifetime of digital memories meticulously organized. She tapped on a folder titled simply Family, the screen filled with thumbnails. Richard, young and arrogant in a tuxedo. Richard, older and thicker, smiling a predator's smile on his yacht. Jacob, as a boy, already learning to stand with his father's proprietary stiffness. Jacob as a man, his face a mask of entitlement, at weddings, at holidays, at baptisms. And Sarah, her smile always aimed at a camera, a calculated performance of domestic bliss. Decades of them. A gallery of her gilded cage and its keepers. Her finger hovered over the Select All button. There was no hesitation, no flicker of doubt. These were not memories. They were artifacts from a buried life, shackles she had carried for far too long. She pressed the button. A blue check mark appeared on every single image. She then moved her finger to the small icon of a trash can at the top of the screen. She pressed it. A small box popped up in the center of the display, a final, automated query from a machine that could not comprehend the weight of the act. Permanently delete these 2,417 items? You won't be able to restore them. Elizabeth looked at the words. Permanently delete. Asterisk. You won't be able to restore them. Asterisk. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. The promise of a truly blank page. The promise of silence. Her thumb pressed, confirm. For a moment, the screen showed a loading bar. Then, it was gone. The folder was empty. A vast, clean, white space remained. She hadn't just deleted images. She had deleted the emotional space they occupied, the power they held, the history they represented. She had unwritten them. She set the tablet down. The screen dark now, reflecting the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. A profound quiet settled over her, deeper than the ocean, wider than the sky. It was the quiet of a war finally over, the quiet of a debt finally paid, the quiet of a soul finally at peace. She looked out at the dark water, not speaking to Olivia, but to the universe, to herself, to the ghost of the woman she used to be. It's quiet now, she said. Olivia turned her head, her gaze meeting Elizabeth's. In that single, shared look, a lifetime of pain, patience, and retribution passed between them. The long years of Olivia's stolen childhood, the silent, suffocating decades of Elizabeth's marriage, the meticulous, dangerous dance of their plan, the final, devastating victory. It was all there, understood without a single word. Olivia gave a small, slow nod, a gentle smile touching her lips for the first time that evening. Yes, she said. Finally.